This week's video is all about tree molds, gang molds, and molds that make molds. Let's get going. I've got these wooden balls beautifully glued with epoxy onto this strip of wood, and the whole point of this exercise is I want to cut them in half. And to that end, I've got the table saw all set up, and I have no idea if this is going to work. This might blow up in my face. There's a very high probability of failure, but we're going to give it a shot. So let's see what happens. This contraption, this beautiful box, is designed to do nothing but catch the little half balls as they fly off. So let's see what happens. Well, that went about as well as could be expected, I guess. Oh, look, I got one. I got one perfect one. Well, that was a fail, but I did a little bit of experimenting, and I discovered that the easy way to cut these rounds was the simple way, and that's just with the old hammer and chisel business. This took a couple of light taps. Boom, done. Sometimes you can overthink yourself and make things a lot more complicated than they need to be. Anyway, I made up a pallet of them, and I'm going to do a little bit of wax work. They're not perfect, but they're good enough, and they're going to make excelente 3/4 inch mold buttons, and we're going to need these for the project that we have in hand. But the main thing that I wanted to talk about today was this. What we're going to make is a tree mold. And we haven't done a tree mold on this channel yet, but we're going to do it now. And a tree mold is nothing more than a gang mold of multiple parts. Now what these parts are is cleats, and the cleats hold the rubber bands. Thing is, I made 6 of them, but I really need probably more like 60 of them. So I sure as heck don't want to hand sculpt 60 of these. So instead, we're going to make this mold. So there you go. Now you know why I call it a tree mold. Kind of looks like a tree or a flower or a plant or something. Let's just get a drop of sticky wax going. We'll start with sticky wax because we love our sticky wax more than life itself. These are too small, obviously, as inlet sprues. They need to be a lot bigger. And for that, I'm going to use sculpting wax. You want a decent size of connection because you want these things to fill rapidly. The size of an inlet sprue is always proportional to the size of the object that you're filling. If you make the sprue too small, the object won't fill because the resin will set up before it can flow through the small sprue channel. If you make the sprue way too big, then you just have made a lot of work for yourself unnecessarily cleaning up a big attachment point, which you don't want. So this is how you make a tree mold. And the point to this, of course, is obvious. We're going to cast all 6 parts all at once. And these are all very similar parts, but you can gang remarkably different parts together into a tree mold. They don't all have to be similar like this, and it still works really well. All right, we've got some mold cases that I cut some pieces of wood out for. Just cut out little bits of wood and let's wax them up. Let's get these kids waxed up. Quick, quick. Got no time to fool around. I like to get the wood nice and hot because that way the wax really soaks in. Not only does the wax prevent things from sticking, it also seals the case and prevents it from leaking. All right, I think we are looking good. Now that everything is waxed, it's time that we go ahead and start to assemble this tree. Let's slam this one on there because we need to put some vents on. If you don't do the vents correctly in a mold tree, your parts are not going to cast. Each one of these parts, each and every one, has to be individually vented. And the vents can't be connected together because if they are connected together, they'll block each other and it won't work. I could use these little tiny vents for all of them, but I'm not gonna. And the reason I'm not gonna is really tiny little vents are hard to cut down. And I'm going to be cutting quite a distance down these vents. So I just want to be able to do it a little bit more easily. Just going to weld that vent on there really well, like that. We'll do a vent on the other side. And that one is short, so it can be little. Make sure we have a good connection and we don't have a starved joint there. It looks a little starved to me. Now it looks like a proper connection. Okay, so we're ready to run this one up over to here. Let me do the other one over here. Same thing. Good sticky wax connection. And then a nice thick rod, good size rod. And you can see as you pour it, the resin's going to pour down the spout and fill and rise up and fill and rise up and fill and rise up. So each and every one of the parts has its own channel in and the air out, and it's filling from the bottom up. It's going to work like a champion. Absolutely perfect. All right. Beautiful. Looks like modern art to me. That is going to work just fine. All right, let's pour some rubber. We got to say thanks to our friends at Silpak for providing the silicone rubber for this project. It's their R-3700-20 platinum rubber. And I love it because it's soft and easy to cut and it's translucent. Thanks so much to Silpak for providing it. Link in the description below. As always, I'm pouring from the bottom up, letting the rubber push the air away from the parts above it. And looks like I mixed up just exactly the right amount I needed. Better to be lucky than good. All right, let's get this thing poured. It's just an open pour. Pretty simple, but I don't want to start to fill the mold until I fill the well around the sides. I'm making sure I'm pushing out the air in that groove, and you'll see why I made that groove all the way around when we cast these pieces. It'll make sense then. I want to make sure it fills that corner now. It's flowing around the nice half rounds really well. This is a really simple mold to pour, but you could still catch bubbles if you weren't careful with how you filled it. I still want that rubber to creep around the base of each one of those half rounds, because then I know I'm not going to catch any bubbles on those edges. And it's doing that perfectly. Notice I never drape the parts with the rubber. I let it rise from the bottom. That's the secret. That is the whole deal. These molds are looking good. Let's take them apart and see what we got. Let's get started with this one. Let's pop some clamps. Well, that's looking pretty cool, huh? It's kind of semi-transparent. The clay did its job. I just used oil clay to seal it up. I love the way these molds come apart. Here we go. All right. This should just peel off. Yes. Look at that. That translucent rubber is pretty cool, actually. Call that a success. Let's pop this one apart. This one's just held together with sticky wax and nothing else. So you know that thing's going to pop apart almighty. No worries. This should just come right on off. There it goes. Oh, yeah. Oh, those are pretty clean. Those are pretty clean. Tiny bits of flash that aren't going to hurt a thing. All right, little trimmage as always. I always like to trim the molds a little bit. Give them a little light trimming. Clean up the molds, make it neat and sweet. This doesn't functionally improve the molds in any way. Just makes them prettier. Okay, let's cut this mold open. This one should be a pretty simple one to cut because it's all basically in one plane. Now, this first top vent up here is small, so I gotta make sure I go right straight down it. This rubber that I'm using, this platinum rubber, is very soft, very easy to cut. It's always helpful to stretch rubber when you cut it. It's much easier to cut stretched than it otherwise is. The other thing about stretching the rubber is you can cut through windows and bridges easier by stretching the rubber. Usually, the further down the part you are, the easier it is to cut. Shouldn't need any more cutting. There, got it. Got little chippies of wax in there. Overall, the thing's pretty clean. All right, beautiful. We have a cut mold. Let's build a cradle. This is all about distributing the pressure and mimicking a round mold. See that? See how round that is? That way I know that I'm going to have pressure neatly all the way around it. Now, people have asked me, this question comes up actually quite a bit. Why go through the trouble of building a mold case and mold cradles? It's like, isn't that twice as much work? And the answer is no, it's not. And here's why. First of all, you can just see how gunked up these pieces are. They're all covered in rubber and clay and wax. And so in order for me to reuse them, I'm gonna have to clean all this stuff off. So I'm gonna be scraping and cleaning and doing all kinds of stuff. I don't have time for that. It takes too much time. But mostly the reason I don't use them is because the job of the case is to contain the rubber to make the block, to make the mold. The job of the cradle is to position that mold in space and also to position the rubber bands. The truth of the matter is, it takes me minutes to make something like this over on the table saw. It's just scrap wood, couple of rips, couple of crosscuts, glue them together, and I'm done. Probably made these in less time than it would take me just to clean these up to get them ready for reuse. Enough said. That's why I don't make cases into cradles. Because this is a translucent mold and it would be fun to watch us fill it up, I'm inclined to pour the first mold with just simply a few rubber bands to hold the mold together. In one way, I'm cheating because the first casting out of a new mold, brand new mold, this rubber is pretty sticky. And when you kind of push it together, it really kind of holds itself together. You almost don't need rubber bands on a small mold like this. On a big mold, forget it. The weight of the resin will force the mold open. But on a little mold like this with little parts, on the first casting, you might not even really need rubber bands. So let's do this. Let's do an experiment. Let's pour this mold so you guys can see the resin go in, because the case would block it. You guys can see the resin go in, and let's see what happens. My guess is we're going to get a pretty good casting. If I'm lucky, I'll get the flashing that I've been telling you about all this time. So let's mix some resin, and let's pour it, and let's find out what happens. First thing we're going to do is color up some B-side, because I got some B-side. And I think I'm just going to use a little UD dye, which is the vilest substance known to mankind, but I do use it. I have it, as you can see, well and truly condomed up, because this stuff gets on your hands. It gets all over everything, which is why I don't wear gloves, because if it gets on my gloves, I touch everything in the shop, and then I got dye on everything, and then I'm miserable and sad. So let's just put a little bit of dye. I think it's going to be orange. Looks orange to me. Come on. Here it comes. This stuff is powerful, man. You don't want much. Let's stir. Now, I have absolutely no idea how much to mix up. I'm going to say, let's just say 50. So 50 means 25 on the A side. Okay, we're a hair over 50, so that's perfect, because we were a hair over on the A, now we're a hair over on the B. We're ready to go. And let's mix. This is quick cast. I thought I would try a little experiment and see if you guys can watch this mold fill. It should fill pretty rapidly, so that ought to be interesting. Let's stir, stir, stir. I also have these other molds on hand ready to fill if I need them, and I might. Okay, that should be enough of that. Let's go. Let's dump. It's already getting warm. Look at that thing fill. Look, now you can see how it fills. Oh, it just filled perfectly and fast, boy. Filled perfectly and fast. So that gives us, let's just dump this because I have so much. I wanted to show you guys this. Let's get this into the tank. Oh yeah, look at that. Look at that. That's pretty cool. Let's run it on over into the tank. And while the tree mold is curing in the tank, you can see what's going on with the resin here in this gang mold of these dots. See how the deepest part of the mold, the thickest part of the resin cures first? It's amazing to me how much the color changes as the resin cures. Open the outlet valve, and away we go. Let's pull it out. All right, got this boy. That looks shockingly good, just superficially. Now I told you, this thing had a pretty good chance of casting well because it was the first pull out of this mold. And it's just, you can just see the mold is just sort of naturally sticky. It wants to stick together, but that goes away real quick, like after the first shot. Oh yeah, look at that, look at that. Yeah, pretty nice. Pretty nice. Let's see, it's still pretty soft. Everything's pretty soft. Let's see if we can get them all out without too much distortion. Yeah. Oh yeah. Not bad. Very, very, very. But what you do see, let's see if I can get you guys to see this. It's pretty hairy. If you look, you can see flash hairs all over the whole thing. That shouldn't be there. They should not be there. And the reason that they're there is there was no pressure holding this rubber together. Now, the whole point to a gang mold like this is to make a bunch of them. We now have 6. Let's go ahead and I'm going to cast 50 or 60 of these, so I'm going to need to cast this a bunch of times. Now, let's talk about this while we've got it. This is the original part. This is a mold. Why did I put a lip around this? I did it because, yeah, when I cast these pieces, I really only want to cast the buttons. I don't want to cast them all together in a part like this, except for the fact that this part right here is now useful for making more molds. See, I can cast a bunch of these and they'll stay forever. This is fragile. These are glued together with sticky wax. It's wood, it's partly wax. It could get beat up. Nothing can happen to these. These will just live forever in my shop, and I can always cast more rubber around and make as many molds as I need. The big advantage to gang molds is speed. If you have one mold, you have 8 cavities, and you can cast them about 3 times an hour. So you could make 24 of these an hour, and that's not bad. But what happens if you need hundreds of them? You use these to make a couple more molds, and now if you make a mold off each of these, instead of 8 cavities, you got 24 cavities, and you cycle that 3 times an hour, you're looking at 72 parts an hour. 3 hours of work, and you got a couple hundred parts. So it's all about speed. It's all about making a lot of parts in a short period of time. So this is a gang mold. I call these tree molds because of their resemblance to plants, but it's just a way of grouping parts. By the way, these parts are all pretty similar, but they don't have to be. You can make a tree mold and you could have very different parts. It's just a matter of how you vent and attach each part to this central sprue that feeds all the parts. There are 6 cavities in this one mold. So that results in a casting like this. Now I made 4 of these, and if you take 4 of these and you put them together into a gang mold like that, now you've got 24 parts. And again, if you have 24 parts and you can cast them 3 an hour, you can cast 72 of these an hour, and you can just pound through a lot of parts. And to make this mold, you just put a box around it. It's simple enough, and it would open up in exactly the same way that this opens up, kind of like pages of a book. All the cuts would run perpendicular to the line of closure, and it would just cut open like that. And because it'd be very easy to extract these parts from a gang mold that looks like this. So you can take a tree mold, turn it into a gang mold, and you can multiply the number of parts that you can make by an amazing amount. Well, I made a bunch of cleats this week for a big mold, and you'll be seeing that project in an upcoming video pretty soon. I hope you liked this video. If you did, hit that like button. It really does help the channel. Thanks for watching. I will see you next week.